right, should be live in a few seconds here. Groups. All right, guys, just getting set up here. Getting ready for tonight's live discussion on episode 4. Groups. All right, so it's always a few minutes, or not a few minutes, a few seconds lag, but so we can just go ahead and get started. If you have any questions or any comments, put them in the chat below and I can read them here. Let me see if we test it out. Test. Yep, so if you have a question on YouTube, a question on Periscope, Twitch, I can read it here on the screen. For Facebook, for some reason, I'll just have to look in the group. And maybe, Daud, you can monitor the face group questions if we have any. Can you hear me? Daud, your mic off.
Heading there now.
Oh, okay. So this week's episode was called Grandma is Raising a Grand Family. And we featured articles from the Independent, History.com, and the Black Agenda Report. The Black Agenda Report is a really great source for you guys for information. Just subscribe to them, and you'll get great news and content, ADOS content, and you won't be missing a lot if you subscribe to Black Agenda Report. So we definitely highly recommend Black Agenda Report. So those were some few articles that were featured in our Rapid News segment. And then we went into the segment in the personality piece on divisive, because ADOS, as you know, over the year or so, we've been real heavy in these internet streets. We get called divisive a lot. It's in a lot of the articles that they write about us. Somewhere, somehow, divisive is going to find a way in that article. And it stems from the fact that we define ourselves specifically as American descendants of slavery. And once we did that, we got labeled divisive. We got labeled as dividing the diaspora. The diaspora is a diaspora because everybody is different. But apparently, Black Americans aren't allowed this same way of defining ourselves as other people are allowed to do that, apparently. But nevertheless, we still ADOS, we still here, and we still define ourselves, and will continue to define ourselves the way that we so choose. Daud, in your response to the personality piece, I believe even in I think episode 2, you were saying that divisive was welcome. Basically, that label was welcome.
Yes, simply because if it's divisive, it's Russian bots. If it's Russian bots, it's why are you being so cruel to fellow Black people? Why don't you recognize their pain? I mean, all these are elemental responses that are elevated purposely in the white domination racist media. That's number one, because they don't want us unified on this fact. And because the reason why the elites in the society expanded non-white immigration was to supplant ADOS, period. So it's only logical that the response would be either indirectly from those actual groups, But we know, like Joanne Reed and others who have access to the media, which we call the black gatekeepers, that's basically been their song and dance. It's either divisive, Russian bots, or how dare you ignore the racism that other Africans or non-white immigrants get. Uh, they were mainly talking points to undermine the struggle, to undermine people's tenacity and ability to stay focused on the goal of our being supplanted in this society and vying for our particular legal justice claim. So it's easy for me to see that if people in their belief systems are so broadened in the idea of any civil rights approach that's not all inclusive, well then people that have that belief to those degrees will be undermined by such statements and therefore weakened in their resolve for this what I believe is a sacred and justifiable effort.
Right. Right. And um, even though you may feel that um, ADOS is dividing the diaspora, in some sense, you have to. And the fact that you have to be who you are. If you're Jamaican American, you're I'm sure proud of that, and you state that. If you're Nigerian, if you're Ghanaian, if you're from Honduras, if you're Puerto Rican, everyone is allowed that space to define who they are. And once we did, it was a major issue. And I in the podcast, I suggested that you unpack that personally. What triggered you once Black Americans, ADOS said, we are American descendants of slavery. This is our lineage. This is the only thing that we know. Yes, we know that our ancestors prior to coming to America were from Africa, somewhere, right? And by not being able to pinpoint directly which country in Africa also is another door that we can discuss at length at another time. But we had to define who we are specifically. Number one, because we have a specific claim, and in order to fight to get that specific claim, you can't just have everybody on the same claim. It has to be who the claim is for, and that does include everybody. And it's not being, hateful or mean or divisive. It's just it doesn't include everybody. It's a fact. So at times you may feel that ADOS is being difficult. I mean, well, we're going to be difficult, but divisive, then that's something I think that's personally you're dealing with on a personal, level. We're not targeting anyone. We're simply defining who we are and going after our claim. Anything else towards that, Daud, that you'd like to add?
Yes, two things. The first thing is we also can obviously see with our own eyes that some African groups are preferred in this society, and they have been, especially if they come from the upper strata of their countries, that they are easily getting in. I was just talking to the other day with an African, one of my many chiefs that are contacting me now. They want to heal me and make me the richest man on the planet. Uh, he remarked that he has tried several times to get into America, but cannot. And I submitted to him to think about that. I know a person of a part of the royal family in Somalia. He got over here without any problems. Now, the reason why I knew him and ran into him is because he and I used to be cot mates in a homeless shelter. And the United States sponsored a coup in his country and that undermined his country seriously. So the royal family was not so royal anymore. They had to go on the run. And so they couldn't afford to send him the money he enjoyed. When he got here, with all that money, he was taken into a room. He told me this. He was taken into a room and shown a film. And then in that film, he was shown the typical street thug Black American who was out hunting to kidnap Africans to either take their organs or to kill them and rape them. I mean,
Wow.
I knew that some programs like that were going on. They were going on definitely in the 50s and 60s as they were seeing colonialism beginning to fall, and they were trying to make sure that the African mind would be anti-American blacks. But when he told me this, and this happened, he said about 4 or 5 years ago when he came into the country, it literally blew my mind that something at this level was still going on. But
Hmm.
because his family could no longer send him the money, he had to spend more time with black people. And he realized that the white people he mainly hung around because he was genuinely scared of American
Hmm.
blacks because of that film and over in his home country, the things he had heard about American blacks. And
Right.
so when he lost his money and his status, the whites around him basically shunned him.
Mm.
And he had to work as a poor black person in the city of New York, and he kept getting into trouble because they would claim he would do this or they would claim he would do that. So he got so frustrated that he came all the way to Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio, and he found more welcoming support from the black community that he lived in than he ever thought possible. But he was still having problems with running into whites at work, the odd jobs he could get. He was either being blamed for things or because he was also Muslim. And so there was all these, bells going off, and he was just tired of it. He decided, he left about a year ago now, he decided to go back home and take the chance on dying with his family rather than to stay with the ongoing indignities that Black Americans face. And he said those were his very words before he left.
Wow. Yeah, I knew that they do have those propaganda campaigns. Well, I learned it since dealing with ADOS movement that they have those propaganda campaigns. That's not something that I knew prior to this.
Yes,
Um,
yeah.
yes.
Memo 223, I believe it was in the 1950s, where they basically called the need to do those things.
Mm, okay.
And my second point was to thank Antoine. And you're familiar with him posting on our group
Yes.
site? So you can come up with his last name for me because it escapes me right now.
I think it's Foster.
That's right.
Yeah.
Antoine Foster, thank you. He's right now viewing us right now. Hopefully I haven't bored him with all my long talking. I appreciate you, Antoine Foster, although sometimes I have
Yes.
problems with my own name. And I really appreciate your contributions to our group and your contributions to our struggle. I thank you, Mr. Antoine Foster.
Yes. Thank you so much for participating in the group and sharing the videos and then sharing information and articles with us. I can't wait for us to go live with our podcast where we're featuring news from that week, because we definitely can include some of the articles that you share with us in our podcast.
Definitely.
So next up was the main event. The main event, which is always includes the title of our show, was called here it is. Here it is. The Rise of the Grand Family. It was a Washington Post article featuring mostly boomer grandparents around America, mainly in ADOS communities, that are raising their grandkids. The tagline was, "A DC housing development serves as a refuge for grandparents raising young children. Is it a model for the rest of the country?" So it's the article was focused on this housing development that occurred in Washington, D.C. And they had 50 50 families of grandparents that were raising their grandkids. This was only the second type of housing project in America. Now, we've known for years in this country that grandparents were raising their grandkids since the days of our enslavement, really, Reconstruction. We can go on Jim Crow, but it really hit harder the hardest when the crack cocaine epidemic took place, where just our families and our neighborhoods and our communities were devastated. And grandparents then were raising their kids, grandkids, and they got barely any resources from city, state, and federal. Of course, they could apply for food stamps and medical, but was it enough? No, it was not enough. A lot of these grand families were living in some of the worst communities. Of course, our communities were basically ignored for and neglected. And so you got grandparents raising grandkids on limited income, limited resources in these communities that were already devastated. So apparently Washington saved 50 spots in this housing project for these families. And we interviewed this article, interviewed the writer of the article, basically trying to get information to you guys on how not only is the cocaine epidemic affect grandparents raising their grandkids. The housing, the next one, and Daud will speak to this, the next one was the housing crash, where grandparents were, Black families lost, most all of their wealth. And then now the opioid epidemic. So it's back to back, and it's now we're in the COVID, situation where grandparents raising their grandkids already probably got underlying condition, and it's another, what is it? Is it 3-4 years later? It's like every 3-4 years later, when we finally catch our breath, we got another epidemic, another something on the horizon. But Daud can speak to a little bit more about each one of those and how it affected us and how grandparents are having to raise their grandkids.
Well, in the 1980s, when the crack explosion, quote unquote, took place, Black families, of course, we know were devastated, and we were devastated almost in similar ways that would later take place in the early 2000s. And that is that along with the crack epidemic and its devastating effects on our society, we also had a devastation of land ownership then, which we again, because it's so undiscussed in the news, that a lot of those crack raids, for those of you over 40, remember those crack raids? They were repossessing those houses. So there was a corresponding devastation of family life, not only due to the crack, but also due to the draconian laws that allowed them to take the property of Blacks. So gentrification in various forms have always been going on. So we go to after the crash of 2007, 2008, and I prefer not to call it what they've been conditioning us to refer to it as, the Great Recession. It was in fact white elite robbery of the Treasury, just like the cocaine problem among Black people. It was really a problem that all races were experiencing at the time, but law enforcement then was used to harm Black people, as today we were able to gain aspects of home ownership due to legislation that was meant to increase home ownership among Blacks. But because of the Clinton era policies, economic policies, which allowed banks to commingle investment loans along with customer loans and allow them to leverage small bets with large bounties in return, it's just that they go to crap when they don't get the returns they expect. And so this was exaggerated in the housing market, and it was covered up by the fraudulent dispersal of fraudulent, or what we know today as junk mortgages. And Black people were targeted for that. So you have almost a correspondingly similar happenings with the crack being brought in by CIA plane loads and taking the possession of homes of crack dealers or places where people were habitating, utilizing crack, all the way to 2008, where you have an economic explosion that devastated home ownership among blacks, devastated collective wealth of blacks, and forced a lot of black people to lose their homes and gain access to home ownership. So much so it impacted the renting area. So the
Mhm.
number one group that was being displaced by just renting a place were black women coming out of
Yeah.
that debacle. And in terms of being able to catch up, the reality is we haven't caught up. Economists have resorted to looking at black people as since the white elite robbery of the Treasury as of by 2013, that since that time we have been always been in perpetual economic recession. So now we're on the brink of another explosion, COVID, and
Right.
its disruption of people's comings and goings and ability to earn a living. And that living has also been further devastated by another cash grab by white elites that have undermined the economy so much so that they've been squirting trillions of dollars into a deep hole they've been digging because they've been playing along with more with these leverage bets that they never got corrected on and laws were never passed to prevent. And these are depression era laws. These were laws put in place because they created, helped to create the depression, but they were all taken away by Mr. Clinton in 1998. The Glass-Steagall Act, please look it up. All they had to do was reinstitute Glass-Steagall measures and modernize them for modern technology purposes, but none of that took place. So the same old people that robbed the Treasury as of 2008 and 2009 are the same people doing the same thing now, but it's all being hidden behind the COVID thing. So here
Mhm.
we go are again, we're faced with another dilemma where the economics are going to create a situation, one, because of what they've done with COVID in terms of having us quarantined and shutting down businesses. And the other side is that white elite robbery that's continuing. Well, it's going to have a devastating effect on Black life again. And I don't know what it's going to be, but I know it's not, it could be as, it can't, it hopefully won't be as bad, but most likely it will be as bad as what happened as of 2013, where by that time, 53% of our collective wealth had been robbed. And to this
Right.
day, we've still not been compensated or repaired in any way for that. And it's going to have devastating effects. The effects that I saw as a therapist by that time, again, in the 80s, I was a case manager. By the early 2000s, I was a therapist, a counselor. And
Mhm.
it was devastating for Black families. Our numbers of Black families in treating young families, and I mean young people and their families, had grown significantly. And the mental health diagnosis they arrived at our doorsteps with absolutely ballooned. And the same characteristic thing that happened in the 80s, more and more grandparents I saw accompanying
Right.
their grandchildren. So it's a typical design, it's ongoing, and we keep falling into it and being pushed into it. And we have yet to offer a counter strategy. And I believe ADOS is a part of that counter strategy. I'll stop.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so we know as ADOS that a lot of you may be um, raising your grandkids, and in that podcast, said, we try to support those efforts. We know that it's not easy. We know that, you know, once you raise your kids, now you got to raise their kids. We understand that that's a difficult task that you afforded. So, we salute you and for stepping up and raising the village. So yeah, that was our main event. The next segment that we spoke about on that was a new segment called Serious Question. And we had where one of our ADOS Columbus members, Hatim, uh, asked a question on Instagram. So of course I grabbed it off of Instagram, gave it to Daud to dissect. And I don't know if I think I could play it. I
Well, that was
think I can play it.
fantastic.
So I'm going to play that for you guys, and let me go to the our website. You can always get all the articles that we discuss, all the any media that we play, news reports that we play. will be on our website in the show notes. So the show notes is where you'll get all the links and information on our news report. So, yep, here we go. So I'm going to share the screen. Wow, this is lovely. I'm gonna share the screen so you guys can see Hatim's question. This is neat. All right. So, all right, this is, I'm in the show notes for this week's episode. Grandma is raising a grand family. Here are the notes. Here are the links to all of the articles, the main event, and Hatim's question. Let's give it a try here. Okay, so that was one of the brothers from Gianni Giorni is his organization. All his information, if you go to our website, you can click on his information, get his Instagram and his social. So Daud is the one that will answer serious questions, hence the title of the segment. Serious questions with Daud, okay? So if you have a serious question that you want to ask, you don't have to do it. You can just shoot him an email at daud@articlesofados.com, and we will answer your question on the podcast. So Daud gave a short answer and a long answer. We want him to give us a recap of the short answer on this, okay?
Yeah, that's right. Go to the original to get the full. But
Right.
the brief answer is that in a new area of the market, we're taught to think of it in terms of market bubbles. In a new area of a market bubble that white elites decided to exploit is called the repo market. And in this repo market, they are able to sort of repossess debt that is owed based on bets that have been placed. Well, since they didn't change the laws back to Depression era laws that were created to prevent a depression, since 2008, 2009, they only continue doing their fraudulent deals. And I'm saying there's definite proof of fraud here already, since because there's been no investigations to find out where all these trillions of dollars went. So in brief, in this repo market, the value of or the cost of doing business rose in terms of their loan values from 2% to 10% overnight. That
Mhm.
means that they were very, very, very out of whack, and that even banks could even be insolvent. And that's what we don't even know, and it's not even being reported. So they had to start paying back those loans. That's what basically that meant, so that they can reduce that amount of cost. So, but we to this day don't know how deep the debt is. So, in the essence of his question, where is the money going? The money is going to cover those bets that they did that required the increase of the interest rates on those on the repo market, so that they can cover the fraudulent behaviors of their institutions that have been making these large bets and not adequately making sure they have enough cash on hand for federal regulations. See, none of that is even being investigated. So if some banks have been insolvent, that means they've been out of compliance. But none of this is even being talked about. So that's where the money is going. It's going to fill this very, very deep pit that we don't know how deep it is because no one's looking at it, based on these poor bets they were doing, and they allowed their institutions to go really in bad balance and in bad banking standards, and they've been covered by the Fed and also by COVID because no one's even looking at it. That's it.
Yeah, so that's where it's going, High Team. They stealing it.
Yeah,
They're stealing
I can
it. In a nutshell, yeah. So yeah, it's so that was pretty much episode 4. Episode 5 coming up will be our last pre-recorded show. I think it's a good episode coming up this Thursday. The next following Thursday, what day was that be? Can't get there's the date. Oh wow, the next coming up is April 30th, and then the next Thursday will be May 7th. So May 7th, episode 6. You'll have current week's news, and we're looking forward to bringing you some great interviews that we've done coming up. And so keep watching, keep sharing. Follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram, follow us. We should be on Periscope, Twitch. Like the page. Invite anybody that you feel is like-minded to the group, or you feel that needs some education and needs this news and needs this information. Invite them to the group. We would appreciate that. Any last words, Daud?
Have a good evening. Peace and blessings.
Peace and blessings, everybody. See you guys live next Sunday, or in case if there's an emergency and we need to come live, we'll let you guys know. But it's Thursdays and Sundays. Thursdays and Sundays. Thursdays for the podcast, Sundays for the live. See you next episode, guys. Peace.